I am Lee Humphreys. I am the director of QuIRI, the Qualitative and Interpretive Research Institute. Thank you for joining us today. So before we get started, I just wanted to let people know that in addition to workshops that will be continuing next semester, I wanted to thank everyone who came to the happy hour that we held the week before Thanksgiving. It was really fun just to have some more, casual conversations about methods and research. And Erica Abbott and I have been planning the program for next semester, and we are taking a lot of the ideas that came from that happy hour. So thank you to those of you who were able to attend. The next thing that I just wanted to mention is that QuIRI is going to start, or is just starting, what we call our sort of featured QuIRI researcher. So part of the job of QuIRI is to promote the really outstanding research that is already going on at Cornell. And so what we're doing is we're going to have a researcher of the month kind of thing. And so we have just launched that this week, and our featured researcher is Sophia Villenius in the Department of Anthropology. And so we have, it's probably because I have small children, we've decided to make a QuIRI Mad Lib for all of our featured researchers, where we give them the main sentence and then they have to fill it in. So I'm putting into chat the website where you can check out our most recent researcher. But this is also just a heads up that we might be contacting you to be a featured researcher. We're looking to feature both faculty, postdocs, and graduate students who are doing qualitative work. So if you do get an email from Erica, I hope you'll respond positively. With no further ado, I wanted to introduce our speakers today. So this seminar is about qualitative data repository and Cornell's relationship with Syracuse University on this. So our two presenters today are Lynda Kellam and Sebastian Karcher. Lynda is the Senior Data Librarian at Cornell Institute for Social and Economic Research, which is a partner of the Cornell Center for Social Sciences, in which QuIRI is also based. And Lynda supports researchers in data management workflows, data curation, social science, and historical data discovery. Sebastian is the Associate Director of the Qualitative Data Repository at Syracuse University. His main interests are in qualitative data management, data curation, and the integration of technology into scholarly workflows. So with no further ado, I will turn things over to Lynda. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much, Lee, for inviting us, and also for everyone coming today. We're really glad to be here. I'm going to do an outline up here. Do a quick discussion of what CISR does and how we can support qualitative research. I recognize a few of you, so you may have seen some of these things before, but that's okay. It's a reminder. And then I'll talk about Cornell's QDR membership and a little bit about what that involves, and then hand it over to Sebastian to talk more about Qualitative Data Repository. If you have questions, you're welcome to put in the chat, although I think we might hold questions to the end because we'll do a big discussions session at the end. But I'll also keep, during Sebastian's presentation and discussion, I'll keep track of the chats that are coming in. So remind us to look back at those. And so, yeah, hopefully you'll have lots of questions and we'll be able to answer them. And I want to acknowledge there are a couple of team members from CISR here. Floria, who does a lot of the work with the qualitative data researchers, is here, so he can also provide some insight on that work from the CISR side. So CSSR is the Cornell Institute for Social and Economic Research, and I think traditionally has been associated with quantitative research or quantitative data, but we do a lot of support. We do try to provide a lot of support for qualitative researchers at CSSR, and a lot of us are qualitative researchers actually. So I'm a history doctoral candidate in history, and so I work, I'm by nature a qualitative researcher. I do data as well though, because I'm a data librarian and I was a political science master's student, so I have a sit on the threshold between the two fields and love them both equally. We also have people who, like Florio, who has a sociology background, does qualitative research in sociology. So there's a wide array of qualitative support within CSSR. So in terms of my support, I am a librarian, so I primarily help researchers find, access, and use data resources. And again, traditionally that it may be with quantitative data, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm open and happy to help anyone if you're looking for qualitative data. There's QDR, but there are also other places that we might look. And so I provide chat and Zoom office hours and can sit down either at these times or outside of these times to talk to you about your research if you are looking for secondary data of some sort. But if you are collecting your own data, we can also help with that. We have a data archive as well. So if you do want to keep your, if you have a smaller data set and you want to keep it closer to home, we can talk to you about that. Or we can also talk with QDR because we have that. We definitely want to tap into their expertise because they have a lot of it. And we are excited to be a part of that partnership now. So feel free to get in touch if you have questions about finding data or if you're starting to collect your own data and working in that, we also have lots of ways to support you. First off is we have software support. So we do provide access to Atlas TI and NVivo, which are two qualitative data analysis software, two forms of that. And Florio does the training for both of these. And access to these are available through computing accounts. So if you want to go in you have to create a CSSR computing account, and then you can go and use Atlas TI and NVivo through that. Some of us have experience, I have experience with Deduce, so that if you're using that separate from what we have, we might be able to advise you on using other types of software. And as a librarian, I have, there are other tools that you might be interested in. I've heard Lee has said that she uses Scrivener, which I've used a lot, or Palladio is another one that's sometimes popular with qualitative researchers, which is an online resource. So there's a wide variety of tools out there that you might be interested in. And if you hear of one, I get this question a lot. People will hear of a software and they will come to me asking me if I've ever heard of it, and I'll try to find somebody who has used it before and then give them advice. So I'm happy to do that with if you come across something and want to know more about it. We do one-on-one consultations and workshops on Atlas TI and NVivo. The workshops will they usually start up pretty early in the spring semester. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll send a message out through the QuIRI network. But even if you're experienced using Atlas TI, we are happy to do one-on-one consultations to help you with particular problems that you may be running into, or if you're wondering if they can do a particular technique, we can help troubleshoot whether it works or there might be some other software out there that would work better. Florio and Jacob, Florio can talk more about this during the discussion, does consultations on team workflow management, so with qualitative research. So if you're starting up a team and you have questions about the workflow for gathering data, they can advise you on that. And then Florio also does the consultations on reproducibility best practices for qualitative research, which Sebastian will address a bit more today. I think touch on that in terms of sharing and what you need to do in order to make sure you have the ability to share your research. In addition, we have secure data services at CSSR, which allows its access to secure servers for restricted data through what some of us like to call it CRADC. I like to call it CRADC just because it's more fun to say. But CRADC is a great place where you can, if you have restricted data or you're creating restricted data where you have PII and you need to have some kind of restriction around it, CRADC is there for you to do that. And we're happy to work with any researchers to figure out if we are the solution for you. And then finally, we do have the ability to do some custom support. We have provided support, grant-funded custom support for qualitative research projects, and the most famous of this, or most well-known, is Freedom on the Move, which is a database of runaway ads for runaway enslaved peoples. And this is something that we built based on grant funding. It's been funded generously by various NEH and Mellon and other funders. So this is something that we have the ability to do, but you would need to come and talk to us and we could figure out whether or not this would work out. It would definitely need to be a grant funded project. We can't just take on grant projects without having kind of the monetary support, but we are happy to talk through ideas for these kinds of things. And I encourage you to take a look at Freedom on the Move. It's a wonderful resource. And then the final thing that I'll talk about is that CISR provides access to other institutions. We provide the institutional memberships for other data archives. So we are a data archive, but then we also provide access to ICPSR, which is the largest quantitative, with some qualitative data archive, social science data archive, Roper Center, which is based at Cornell, but it's a fee membership, so we provide that membership. And then the most recent, which we're really excited about, is QDR, which provides curation and archive services for qualitative data. QDR, we were able to join in July, so we started up in July, unfortunately right in the middle of the pandemic, so it's been an interesting time to join something, but we are really excited about the relationship that we have with QDR, and we want our researchers to use this service. Sebastian can talk more about this, but for 2020-2021 academic year, the institutional membership fees cover curation and preservation of all data projects that are deposited at QDR. So we have, and we can talk more about the workflow and whether or not people are at that point that they actually could do this, but QDR can provide an incredible number of services for us to help get our qualitative data ready for archiving and sharing into the future. So on that, I'm going to hand it over to Sebastian.
Thank you. And thank you, Lynda. And thanks for having me. So I want to talk a little bit about QDR, but I want to focus about what sharing qualitative data looks like and what it entails. Then circle back to QDR, also address some of common concerns that we frequently hear and that many of you, I'm sure, have been thinking about since you signed up for this webinar, and then hopefully have lots of time for conversation and discussion. So QDR, we are not just a relatively recently part of CISR's portfolio of supported data repositories, we're also a relatively young data repository, founded in 2000, or it's online since 2014, founded a little bit earlier. We're currently mainly NSF funded, some other smaller grants. And then we also get increasing amount of funding from individual deposit fees and institutional membership fees, such as Cornell's. Our headquarters, so to speak, are at Syracuse. We have people at Georgetown and at the iSchool at the University of Washington. The origins of QDR are in political science. Those of you who are in political science and neighboring disciplines may know that there is a large international summer institute for qualitative methods at Syracuse University, headed by Colin Ellman, who is also QDR's director. And kind of out of that broader sphere emerged the concern with how can we help qualitative researchers share their data, because really all the infrastructure that exists, which is amazing, but it's really targeted at quantitative researchers. This took some time to get going, and so initially growth was quite slow. Now it's going much faster. We're adding typically about 2 or 3 data projects per month, currently at 93, and as Lynda pointed out, Cornell is an institutional member. So here are some examples of data that we have, and I'll look at some others in more detail in a minute. So at the bottom left, this is photograph or scan from archival data. It's actually JFK's diary when he was still a congressman from a project investigating foreign policy views of different US presidents. Then in the middle, you see what's probably our bread and butter. This is the identified transcript from a focus group, yes. Discussion, this one from a project on maternal health and traditional birth attendance in Nigeria. Then perhaps slightly more unusual at the top right, this is a screenshot from a presidential campaign video in 1994, I believe, Peru presidential campaign. So that's Alberto Fujimori, and we have a collection of campaign videos from Brazil and Peru. That's from a researcher who studied presidential campaigning in Latin America. And then below that, we have actually a fair amount of that. It's a table from, I'd call that gray literature, broadly speaking. So that's a report from Mexican municipality on water service provisions. So to give you some other examples and look at them more closely. So this is kind of, I've put these together as kind of a collage. On the left here, you see the structure of the project a little bit as it appears on QDR. This is a project on seed ecology and Francophone, always get confused, Eastern Africa. And so you see, again, a transcript of an interview there. It's, in this case, it's translated. That's not required. We also take transcripts in any language we get them. We have, I think, 8 or 9 different languages currently, including Bangla and one other Indian language. So can be quite varied. There is cool documentation stuff. So these are focus group maps. And then there is also, and we do take quantitative components of mixed method data. So these are basic characteristics, rainfall characteristics of and associated with the farmers that Crystal Jones, the researcher here, talked to. Completely different project. This is Lisa Vidin, a prominent ethnographer of Middle Eastern politics and particularly Syria. So she has this fascinating project talking about the relationship between art and humor and authoritarianism and in Syria. And she can't, for very understandable reasons, share her interviews and most of her field notes, but she talks a lot about the art and satirical products, especially produced. And with some additional funding, we were able to get licenses and have translated 2 of the Syrian political satirical TV shows that she talked about. And so we are sharing these, and they're quite fun, and it kind of gives more texture to the stuff that she's talking about in her book, which came out last year. She also, because she's talking about contemporary politics, uses a huge amount of online sources, many of which are quite unstable. So you see some, like the New York Times, that's not going to go away, but Arab News, Syria Untold, I think, already has gone under. So some of these are quite unstable. And so one of the things that we helped her with would make sure that all of these are permanently archived. We use PermaCC, which is a service that was started at the Harvard Law Library and is now more widely used. And we have some scripts that help us do that very effectively. Again, here's some archival data. This is fun because the data from the archives of the Supreme Court justices has all been dedicated to the public domain. And so it's very easy to share. And this is shared as part of a book. And you kind of see here documents that are specifically referenced in the book, but then a huge range of documents that were kind of consulted and are in the backdrop of the book, but not explicitly referenced. and then also some quantitative replication data that Matt Hitt deposited with us. We made sure it runs in Stata, and so we kind of don't do heavy quantitative curation, but we do do basic curation for those sorts of data. That's both experimental and survey data. And then finally, in one sense, is this a more typical project? So these are interviews. The identified, this is Corey Steimer, researcher at University of Maryland, Baltimore. And this is from sex work cohort diversion project. So it's quite sensitive, but it's also a number of years old, right? These are 8-year-old interviews. And she did a lot of work with us on getting these thoroughly de-identified, but they also remain restricted. So you can't just come to QDR, create an account and download them, but the restrictions are relatively light. So it's reasonably easy to get a hold of those. And in addition to these, she also provided a large amount of documentation, which is something that we always emphasize. So the different interview guides for her semi-structured interviews, she did focus groups, the guides for that, a lot of description of participant selection, also kind of the types of assurances of confidentiality, those sorts of things. So just kind of to give you a broad overview of different types of things that you can find on QDR. So by now, you know, you're thinking, I want one of these. So how do you get your data into QDR? And we try to make this really quite simple. Typically, we like to have an initial consultation, and that can happen anytime. And that's typically either with me or with Desi Kirilova, who is the other senior curator at QDR. And this actually works best if we do this quite early. So whenever possible, we try to have these conversations before you collect any data. When you apply for a grant, that's a great moment to have these conversations, because you typically now have to write a data management plan anyway. In some cases, we've had these 4 or 5 years before we see any of the data, and that's great. And we can, you know, update somewhere intermittently. Then when you're ready to start depositing your data, and the way QDR is set up, you can do that at your own pace. You can, you know, take 6 months to get your data up, or you can do everything in bulk. Most researchers like to, you know, organize everything themselves and upload it. For us, it really doesn't matter. It's there waiting for you if you want to circle back to it. And then sometimes we have another conversation if we have particular questions right off the bat. Or we then start with the curation process, which includes a disclosure risk review when you have human participants data. So while you're responsible for the de-identification, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that is in a bit, we will check that we don't have any particular concerns about it. We think through how might the data be organized, and that's often a consultative process. So we make suggestions and you maybe have ideas, and then we kind of go back and forth. The idea is that they reflect your work, right? We can really just suggest. We suggest file naming, those types of things where we have concerns about file formats used. We suggest transformations, and we typically are able to do those with few exceptions. There's one other important thing that I'm forgetting. That's probably the main. Oh, right, documentation. We look at the documentation you provide, and then we suggest other things that we think would be really helpful for researchers coming to see your data to understand what's actually going on. Once we're done, we send this back to you. You take a final look. Anything that you have concerns with, we fix, and then we publish and promote it again when you want to. So for example, if you want this to coincide with an article or a book publication, you just let us know. And once we have everything in place, we can publish within hours after you let us know that you're ready for that. So as I said in the beginning, sharing qualitative data is fairly new. It's also not uncontroversial. It's particularly controversial in political science. In other disciplines, there's less controversy around it, although it's not necessarily more common there. one thing that I want to kind of flag at the beginning, and that also goes to the importance of thinking ahead, talking to your participants about data sharing is really important in our view. And we actually look at every single consent script of data deposited with us, and we have sent people away, so to speak, when we found that they've clearly promised that they won't share their data with everyone. This is consent that two researchers at the Guttmacher Institute have used for quite sensitive data. I like to use that because they do interviews about abortion histories. And so quite sensitive. And what they found is even when you give people the direct question, is it okay if we share the de-identified data or not? I think they had 43 out of 46 people opting in. It's often a misconception that people think participants are going to be super unlikely. But this also means there are people who do not want their data shared, and having these opt-in or tiered consent scripts is often a nice way to assure that you also hear those voices without sacrificing data sharing. The Cornell IRB has been at the forefront of IRBs who is aware of data sharing discussions. I think Florio actually worked with them on some of this. So you have, compared to some of your colleagues at other institutions, you have it comparatively easy, and you'll find a very sophisticated understanding, I would say, from our conversations with them at your IRB running with these types of protocol parts. Typically, not always, there can be on the record interviews. We have some interviews with elite politicians, for example, that are on the record, but typically, we assure confidentiality when we talk about data sharing. And there's a number of ways of doing this. I like to show this because it highlights the importance of contextual knowledge for de-identification, which is why we asked you to do this. So for example, this is in Spanish. So to start with, it's hard to do this if you don't speak Spanish. You also kind of need to understand what some of the things actually refer to. So you have an acronym like CONABIP down here. You need to know what this refers to. Is this a disclosure risk? In this case, it's just the National Association of Libraries. So obviously, when you talk about libraries, that's not a disclosure risk. But some other examples are, we had researchers who talked about specific locations like a mall, those types of things. If we're talking about, Destiny Mall, that's probably not a disclosure risk. If we're talking about a small strip mall with 3 stores, it might be those sorts of things. So contextual knowledge is really important to do this properly. It's also the case that qualitative de-identification is kind of somewhere between art and science. And the more you take out, the more de-identified the data are, but the more useless the data become, right? And so it's kind of a dance that's also should somewhat be informed by your view of the data, of what's most important and most interesting, and what perhaps can be de-identified with less loss of significant details. Not all data needs to be in the public. I showed the example earlier. That's actually the access condition from that particular project. We can apply access restrictions at the file level. So if you have a project where some of the stuff is easy to share, but some is quite sensitive, we don't have to, lock the entire project away. And it is the case that restricted data gets accessed much less for obvious reasons, takes more steps. So typical examples would be something simple as the above, right? We just check the person requesting the data is a real researcher. We can verify their identity. Often people ask that they have some institutional affiliation, which puts them kind of in the regulatory context of institutional oversight, and provide a brief research plan. In particular for data where that still contains PII, personally identifiable information, we can require that they themselves pass IRB, and it probably actually would be required that they do if there's PII in the data. It can also often make sense to impose a temporal embargo on data. Some people just do that short embargoes to be able to publish on the data first. So then we're typically talking, a year, max 3 years. But in some cases, that's actually a protection for human participants, say, while they're holding a position or in office, those sorts of things. One thing that quantitative researchers typically don't have to fight with, and qualitative researchers thinking about sharing their data have to think about a lot, is copyrights and licenses. Just as a reminder that almost everything that you see that's published since 1930 is under copyright, even if you can freely access it, like if you download it off the internet. There are exceptions, right? Some stuff is explicitly open license. Most of you will have heard about Creative Commons licenses. Some materials are in the public domain. In the US, that's everything the government publishes. That's not, by the way, an international rule. That's just US law. So British government publications, Canadian government publications fall under copyright. If you use physical archives, they often have explicit rules about publishing digital copies of their holdings. They differ a lot. US archives tend to be fairly permissive. European archives less so, in particular German archives, I know, are very strict about their rules regarding this. Ask them, don't burn any bridges by putting stuff on a repository and then have them find you. If you use digital archives, especially commercial ones like ProQuest or Gale historical documents, even when the material they present is technically out of copyright, right? Like 19th century newspaper articles say, the license terms that you agree to by using something like that are incredibly strict and typically make it entirely impossible to share those materials. One concern that we also hear a lot is, aren't we just imitating quantitative researchers? Is this whole data sharing reproducibility? Isn't this just, I've heard the term positivist straitjacket, those sorts of things. This I just found on Twitter 2 days ago, and I thought I'd share it with you. Laura is just grounded theory, kind of sociology work. And she makes the point that allowing broader access and transparency to her work is really not a question about positivism, it's a question of democratizing knowledge. She's quite radical in her views. I don't need everyone to be quite as all in with their transparent dedication to transparency, but I think it's a nice way to think about this, that you may have different reasons to be transparent. This may not just be, because you're following the quote unquote scientific methods, but this may just be because allowing deeper engagement and inquiry into your materials and methods is more democratic, is more discursive, is however you like to think about the role of your research in scientific communication. So we've talked about the institutional membership. I would say there are 3 parts that I want to highlight. We do free curation and storage. That includes, the consultations for what I like to call typical qualitative data projects. So that's typically what's in an article, what comes out of a dissertation. If you have a giant multi-person grant-funded research project, right, you want to deposit 50 gigabytes of videos and 200 transcripts that we have to review, please talk to us and write us into your grant. It's still not going to be a huge, red line in your grant budget, but we can't do that off the costs that we feel are reasonable to charge for institutional membership. We are very happy to do data management and data management planning consultation. That can be just with QDR. That could also be as a 3-way conversation with Lynda or Florio, who know the institutional structures at Cornell better and can point you to, maybe use these computing resources, these storage resources, those sorts of things. That can be for data management plans. So I routinely review the 2 pages that people send for the NSF before they send them, mostly when QDR is written into them, but that's not a strict requirement. I also, if you do teach typically graduate level classes, but if you really want your undergrads to hear about this, I'm game for that too. As my time permits, I'm very happy to Zoom into classes. And those are often really good conversations. And in my experiences, younger scholars are kind of at a good place where they kind of shape their views on that and are perhaps less jaded by existing disciplinary discourses, either all for or all against. And so that's a really fun opportunity to talk and think through these issues. I do want to make my general spiel of why can't you just put this on your website? Why should you put this in a data repository, whether it's QDR or otherwise? One of the core parts is it's going to stay there, and the link to it, those are the DOIs, those are going to stay the same for hopefully as long as any of us will live. That also applies to the long-term preservation, right? When we think through file formats, we think through which file formats will be around in 30 and 50 years. And if we were wrong, kind of we monitor the ones that we have, and we are able to continue transforming them as need be, say if for some reason PDF ever goes away. We can help you improving the quality of the data you share, what you document, how you share. We put a lot of emphasis on making our data discoverable. So you can find it obviously at QDR. Our data is also all indexed by the Google data search. It's available on the data site, the organization who gives us DOIs for data search. It's available on the Harvard Dataverse. They harvest our metadata. So it's findable in a lot of different ways. And we think that's very important, because one of the reasons surely you share the data is so that others can find it and use it and give you credit for it. And then finally, we are able to handle access controls. While it's possible for you to be involved in the process of providing access to data based on requests, in most cases, researchers are happy to just kind of delineate, these are the criteria that I want, and then we handle the actual formalities, and you get a couple less emails, which I'm sure you all appreciate. And then, as I said, sharing these later, two things that obviously there's our website. One thing that we're quite proud of, we've done with funding from SSRC, an online course on managing qualitative research data that really goes from how do you think about the planning process, how do you organize, and then how do you work with the collected data. That's all open licensed, open sourced, et cetera, and that's available there. And then if you are thinking about applying for a grant, I know all the January, February grant deadlines are coming in. NSF is increasingly pushing for people to use the DMP tool for writing data management plans. And I can make a little pre-announcement here. That's not quite official yet, but we've joined with DMP tool and the Princeton University's research data services for and we'll have a small competition for the best data management plan for qualitative research. That's going to happen spring 2021. So this round and last round data management plans would be eligible. And yeah, with that, looking forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. That was really fantastic. Lynda, both really, really helpful in terms of thinking about the kinds of institutional support that's available to us at Cornell, which I personally have really, I learned a lot. So I guess I will say that if people have questions, you can put them into chat, you can raise your hands. I might start out maybe, if you will allow me. I'm really interested in just, well, I have many questions, Sebastian, but one is this question. I think in quantitative research and open science, reproducibility is a big goal of open science. And yet I think within qualitative work, that is less of a goal, I think. And so I guess I'm just wondering how, like, have you seen people do replications, or is it really about engaging with the research, the data in a different kind of way, or how have you seen that sort of play out? Yeah,
I actually was considering putting a slide on it, and then I decided against it, and I should have. So I'm mostly a reproducibility skeptic for qualitative research. And the reason is that I think I think two main reasons. One reason is that I think a lot of us come from a somewhat interpretive perspective, right? And that's a wide spectrum from like, post-structuralist interpretation to quasi-positivist interpretation, if you want. But I think all interpretation means that the person of the researcher is involved in the act of getting from data to results. And at that point, it becomes not reproducible. That's reason number one. I think even if you are more positivist oriented, a lot of qualitative research happens at an earlier stage of the research cycle. So more oriented towards hypothesis generation, measurement, those sorts of things. And again, much harder to reproduce. All that said, we are running a project on what we call verification of qualitative research that we've done some articles for the American Journal of Political Science. Those of you who know political science may know that AJPS has a policy that all quantitative research gets verified, which means that all the code must run and produce exactly the tables and figures as they get published. And so we're running the qualitative equivalent, which is essentially going through the qualitative, typically case studies for AJPS, and looking at the empirical claims they make and checking that the sources they use, whether they're secondary or primary, actually back up what they say. So it's close to a sort of fact checking. And it's fairly limited, I would say. That there's, one could argue how it's a really interesting question on how deep we go, but it's the closest to reproducibility that I know. And I think it works for AJPS because by its disciplinary role, and I'm sorry, I don't know if many people are familiar with poli-sci disciplinary roles, but it's a very, very positivist journal. So it's 95% quantitative, and the people who publish there qualitatively do so still within kind of a similarly kind of causal inference, generalized rules type of organized framework. I don't think we could do the same type of work reasonably for heavily ethnographic or interpretive article, but we do have an NSF grant proposal in to figure out how more of that would look. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think personally, I always question why we've come to this point. Like, what is it that we don't trust either each other or something that we need this kind of checks and balances, I think. But yeah.
So if I may, because I don't think of them as checks and balances. So when I have looked at reproducibility materials of quantitative articles, it's rarely been because I didn't believe the researchers, although some skepticism is perhaps warranted, but really because I was interested in engaging more deeply. And so the first article I ever wrote was grabbing a couple of people's reproducibility material, and I didn't quite buy a measurement that they had used. So we recoded the variables, one of their key variables, and reran the same material, which we could because we had all the data of code of the original analysis. So I think as the function really as transparency, and the transparency is what really allows us to more deeply engage with the research that's happening. When Gary King published a seminal article in the mid-90s that he called, unfortunately, replication, but he means reproducibility in that context, his justification for this is not to check that people aren't cheating, but his justification is that by providing all the materials that allow other people to reproduce our research, I'm providing actually all the materials that allow them to understand what we've actually done in our analysis. So that level of transparency, that's what I kind of target for qualitative research too. Not, as I said, I don't believe reproducibility is a goal or necessary, but I think that transparency allows people to more deeply engage with our work. And that's why I think we should do it.
That's great, thank you. I see that Nick Klein has a question.
Thanks, Lee, and thanks so much for this talk. It was a really interesting presentation. I had a related question to Lee's. One thing I didn't see in the presentation, and I'm assuming it's there, but is the capability to share sort of the coded data from QDA software, right? And I'm curious if people do that often, and sort of how that works with the various softwares that people have, and then sort of how you think about that if you were going to do that at the beginning of a research project rather than at the end where you're like, oh, now how do I package this out?
Well, these are great questions. I'm so happy with your questions. So QDAS project used to be a huge mess because everyone has their own proprietary data format and you can't share it. There is now, and some of you may have actually stumbled across this, there is a joint format that is most typically referred to as REFI QDA, REFI for Rotterdam Exchange Format Initiative QDA, Atlas, Deduce, Max QDA, and NVivo all export into that format. Since they all vary somewhat by capabilities, there's some data loss involved, but your basic, texts and codings are now able to travel between software, which is cool for a whole host of reasons. I hope it will also be cool for teaching and those sorts of things. It's also great for us as an archive because it's an open format and we don't have to say, well, we can store your, NVivo project file, but we have no idea if you'll be able to open it in 5 years. So we love that. We're super excited about it. We, again, have a grant project in to study more about how we can better take advantage of that. People don't share coded data a ton. We have, I think, 2 projects in QDR where that's the case. We'd love to get more. I think it's a really rich opportunity to kind of in that vein show more of your work. I honestly don't, I have some theoretical ideas about how to work in a way that makes sharing easier. And I guess the biggest one is to kind of keep notes about which memos you would want to remove before sharing, those sorts of things. But I don't have a lot of empirical kind of experiences to back that up, and we'd love to study that more. And that's part of a grant that we've in with the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences. And then Lynda posted more information.
Thanks so much. Sorry, Lynda, you go, please.
Yeah. I'm just saying that the thing I posted, it's geared to librarians who are curating data, qualitative data in Atlas TI format. But it does provide some, I think, interesting questions that you can ask yourself as you're creating your data set that might be helpful for thinking of how the librarian or the archivist who would be thinking about your data set. So it's kind of working backward that way.
Yeah. And it looks like that has the info about the format that Sebastian was talking about. Great, thanks so much, that was great.
Any other questions? I was like, maybe I'll ask then while you all think, because Sebastian, I know you said it works best when someone is starting out, but I also know we have a year to get projects up. And so, I mean, like a number of projects up here at Cornell. And so I'm wondering, what are the circumstances under which you would work with someone who has a project which has already been collected, already been analyzed, maybe already published, and they're thinking about this as a kind of archive transparency kind of opportunity?
I mean, any circumstances. We try to do our best with any data that comes our way, really. The one exception is human participant data, where the consent excludes data sharing. We can still think about, are you able to share what we've done is, extensive documentation. If you've done coding of the data, maybe a well-documented coding matrix with excerpts, which would typically be considered more like a publication, so wouldn't be prevented by that consent. But so that would be the scenario where we would actually, give you a hard-ish no, but otherwise we'll try our best. And so one of the things that we published earlier this year was Mark Trachtenberg's papers for mid-2000s book and materials he had collected over 3 or 4 decades prior to that. And that was a lot of work. It's also enormous amount of materials, I think a total of 2,500 or so documents, and not particularly well organized. But it ended up published, and it's a great project. So essentially we'll try to work with that, with whatever you had. Just because it's not in a perfect state doesn't mean you can't share it. It's also possible to, share perhaps an excerpt if you feel like you maybe don't have the capacity to de-identify every single one of your transcripts, but you feel like if you are able to show maybe 10 or 20% of your transcripts, and we have a couple of projects that did that, that would allow people to get a much deeper read into your data, even though it's not the completeness of the data. And then that gets covered in the documentation.
That's helpful. Thank you. So I'm not seeing any other questions. So maybe I'll end with one last question, which is next steps. So if someone is interested, is the first step to reach out to you, Lynda, or is it to reach out to Sebastian, or both of you? What do you recommend?
Whatever's easiest. But we would like to have a sense of how many people are going to Cornell, but we can, or to QDR, but we can always communicate with Sebastian. So if somebody ends up at QDR without going through us, they'll let us know. Going forward this year, there's unlimited seats. Next year it will be 5, possibly. So at that point, we will have to keep a little better track of who's coming through, and at that point, there'll be more communication. So me, if you would like, or Sebastian,
or both of us at once, right? You can just CC both
fun.
of us on an email, and then Lynda will be in the loop, and it's probably then we'd schedule the conversation with you.
And that way, if there are other things that people are wanting to know about, like need software support or team support, then we can step in there.
That's great. And so the timing is upon signing up for it, not when the data gets deposited, right? In terms of timing of those. Perfect. I'm just thinking of all of those graduate students who are working on dissertations, who are, beginning at the stages, and, it might be, they might not even be around Ithaca or at Cornell by the time they're actually ready to deposit everything. So we want to make sure we can support them. Excellent.
Great.
Well, thank you, Sebastian, Lynda. Thank you. This was incredibly informative. I feel like I can go forth and at least tell people to contact you. I can't answer all of their questions. I want to thank everyone for coming and joining us today. I hope you found this as helpful as I did. We are recording it, and Sebastian said that he would be willing to share his slides. And we will definitely be sure to get Lynda back to help share with us some of the software stuff, which I know we're all trying to manage. So thank you again, and have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Take care.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.
Thanks again, Sebastian. Bye. Thanks, Lynda.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right, shall we stop recording?